The morning, 17th of Tammuz, we mourn the destruction, may be transformed into days of joy immediately. Amen.
Amen.
Chesed v'rachum, without any suffering whatsoever for anyone. Amen. Okay, we are in Halacha 47, chapter 473, the Alter Code of Jewish Law. We are learning the laws related to the end of the Haggadah. Toward the end of Magid. So at the end of Magid, we first begin by identifying the three primary items of the Seder, the Pesach, the Matzah, and the Maror, and we discussed the halachas around that yesterday, raising it up that it be seen, and that therefore brings those present to cherish the mitzvah. From there we say, B'chol davar in every generation, how beautiful, how amazing the Exodus is, that it continues in perpetuity. And from there we say, and therefore we sing a song to you, and we praise you and thank you for redemption, and request the future one. And from there we launch into the Hallel. That's the order of events. Mm-hmm. So now, 47, we begin the halacha surrounding the Hallel, at least the first half. We do not recite a blessing over the Hallel that is said on this night, specifically the Hallel said at the Seder. Why? Because it isn't read in one single continuum. Ella, rather, part of the Haggadah, part of the Hallel is read prior to the meal. And another part of it is read after. The second part of it is read after the benching, right? We read the story of the Exodus. We give that transition we said earlier about, and therefore we have to praise you because every generation is still going. And from there we go into the Hallel, but we only say the first half of the Hallel. And then we stop. We do matzah, maror, kairach, meal, benching, and then Hallel. And because we don't do it in one continuum, therefore we don't make a bracha on this Hallel. We do, however, make a bracha on the Hallel on the night of the Seder, not at the Seder, but the Hallel, what we say in synagogue after the Arvis, after the evening services, after Ma'ariv, that Hallel we do say a bracha on. I think I mentioned this in the past. I have a friend of mine who makes the argument that women are obligated in the Hallel should say the entirety of Hallel before the Seder, just like the men do, with a bracha, so they don't miss out on the bracha of Hallel if the only Hallel they say is the one that's broken up during the Haggadah. I haven't seen my mother, my sisters, my grandmother, or my wife do it, or my mother-in-law, so I'm not telling anybody that they should tell their wives to start doing it. I haven't told my wife she has to start doing it, but I'm just making the argument, just presenting that perspective.
It's called shalom bite.
Well, anyway, okay. Memches halacha 48. Afal pi shekriyas Hallel im umut k'moshe isbar b'siman tov, even though, as explained in chapter 420, Hallel is to be recited while standing, and right, whenever we say Hallel in the synagogue, we stand. Yeah. Unless the Hallel of this night, the Hallel set at the Seder table, we say it even as we're sitting. Why? Because all of our activities tonight must be in a way that presents and projects freedom, and free people sit and lounge. Therefore, the person is not pushed, inconvenienced to stand during Hallel, and therefore we sit during the Hallel. There's a certain openness, freedom, and what's the word I'm looking for? Royal tone to singing Hallel while you're sitting. Singing Hallel while you're standing in shul has a sense of servants and reverence to it. That's the idea. You're praising Hashem. You stand and praise. The night of the Seder, we're the king. And the king sits when he sings praise.
I think in the Beit HaMikdash.
Or if you will, there'll be a prince in the presence at the king's table. Whereas in synagogue, we're a servant in front of the master. Maybe something like that. If God is the master and the servant, we stand in the presence of God. But we're sitting at the table of the Seder, we're like the prince sitting at the king's table. So we sit and sing the praise rather than stand. There's a certain element of freedom to that. There's a certain element of grandeur to that.
No, I was going to say, I think in the Rambam's one chapter, and talking about the Beit HaMikdash, it says that the only person who's allowed to sit in the courtyard
Is the king.
Is the king.
That's right. That's right. The Kamaka, nonetheless, nonetheless, he should not recite the Hallel and the Haggadah while he's leaning. So his leaning is during the eating, and other times, but not while he is reciting the Hallel or the Haggadah. He should sit with reverence and in awe. So even though he's sitting at the table, and there's a certain level of royal freedom, nonetheless, we're still doing a form of communication. We are talking to Hashem, and we're reading words of Torah, so there's got to be a sense of respect and reverence, and if we sit upright.
That's interesting. It's like
it is interesting.
It's you have to demonstrate your freedom, but it doesn't mean it's
it shouldn't
unfettered. There's also limitations in freedom.
There's
as long as it doesn't.
There's a fine line between freedom and frivolity.
Right. Yeah.
And you have to make sure you balance that line.
Right.
And when you're reading words of Torah, there's certainly no room for frivolity.
Right.
Okay, halacha 49.
Psalm 75 begins with the whole idea that other nations of the world, they celebrate the holidays with frivolity. We do the sacred service.
Yeah. Yeah, the Rambam writes famously, right? The person that I can't remember which context it is. There's two contexts in which he says something very similar. I think it's about not how he speaks negatively about drinking on Yom Tov. I think it's with respect to not inviting guests. If a person doesn't invite guests or share the holiday with others, then it's just the simcha of his stomach, not the simcha of Hashem. Something like that. Simchas kreisei, rather than the simcha of Hashem. I think he said in the context of inviting guests. Maybe he said in the context of drinking. No, I think it was in the context of inviting guests.
People are sitting at the table. Two people are sitting at the three people are sitting at the table. Everybody's sitting at the table. The whole idea of recognizing that we have to have words of Torah at the table. Otherwise, it's an empty feast.
Yeah. Okay, halacha 49. Yep. The birchas asher galanu. In the blessing asher galanu, which is a blessing at the end of the Haggadah, thanking God, the one who saved us, and so shall he redeem us in the future. And we say that then when you will redeem us, we will come to the temple and we will eat there from the offerings and from the Pesach offerings, from the sacrifice and the Pesach offerings. So Tzorach Leimar says the Alter Rebbe, one has to say min hazvachim. First, he should say, and there we will eat from the sacrifices. V'achkach min hapsachim. And then afterwards, he should say, and we'll eat from the Pesach offerings. So we will eat there from the sacrifices and the Pesach offerings, rather than Pesach offerings and then sacrifice. Order. Why? Lefi shazevach yechagiga, because the offering or the sacrifice mentioned here is referring to the chagiga offering, the holiday offering, hanachelas b'lalazeh, which is eaten on that night, koydem achelas pesach, which is eaten before Pesach offering. Because the Pesach offering is meant to be eaten while you finish your meal, and therefore make sure you're thanking Hashem or saying that when we build a temple and we will enjoy the offerings, we have to make sure we're in the correct order. First, the offerings as a whole, and then Pesach offerings, because the offerings as a whole includes the Chagiga offering, which is eaten before the Pesach offering. Yeah?
Yes.
Okay. Now, Pesach Matzah Shabbos, but when Pesach is Saturday night, Yesh Medaktikon Leimar, there are those who have the custom to be precise and switch the order. This is our Chabad custom. To say Min Hapsachim U'Min Hazvachim, to first say Pesach, to first say we will then eat from the Pesach offering and from the other offerings. Why? Because the Chagiga offering is not eaten at all on Saturday night. The motion is Bar Lamaila, as explained above. It's earlier, halacha 23 of this very chapter. And the reason, this very chapter, halacha 23, what does it say in halacha 23 of this chapter? Let's go back and see. I don't remember learning it, but I think you did.
But there's no Chagiga on Shabbat.
Yeah, because you can't make the Chagiga on Shabbos. And because because you have the opportunity to bring it the next day, so you bring it the next day. And therefore, we say on Saturday night, you would say, then we will eat from the Pesach offerings and the Zevach afterwards. Right? Back to Halacha 49. And therefore, the reference here when we say we're going to be eating the Pesach offering tonight, Saturday night, when Mashiach comes, and the Zebach, the other offerings, tomorrow morning, which is the Chagiga and the other holiday offerings. Okay, so there are those who write it who say it that way. That's the Chabad custom for this reason. So we want to stick to the order of the way it would have been eaten, or the way it's going to be eaten when Mashiach comes speedily and the temple is here. So on a regular weekday, it's the offerings and then the Pesach offerings. That's the order of how it's eaten. On the Saturday night, it's Pesach offerings, eaten Saturday night, and then the regular offerings the next day. And there are those who are not so scrupulous about this particular rephrasing. And they stick to one uniform text, whether it's Saturday night or not. Why? Because what are we asking for? We're asking that Hashem bring us to future holidays where we will rejoice in his service. And then we'll eat next year. And then the Pesach offering won't be on Mata Shabbos. It'll be, and therefore we'll be eating of the regular offerings first, which is the regular Chagiga offering eaten on that night, and the Pesach offerings. In other words, are we talking about tonight, or are we talking about next year? If we're talking about tonight, then if it's Saturday night, you got to switch the order, because tonight we wouldn't be eating the Pesach offering as a Saturday night, and we'd only be eating the regular. Sorry, we would only be eating the Pesach offering, not the regular offering, and the regular offerings come the next day. Right? On Saturday night, we do Pesach and then Zebach the next day.
Why is that? Sorry, I thought this was about Shabbos, not Saturday night.
Right, but you have to you have to slaughter the offering earlier that day, so you eat it that night at the Seder. So the Seder Saturday night, it would have had to have been slaughtered earlier that day. So again, if you're talking about the tonight Seder and tonight is Saturday night, then you got to switch the order around. Zebach first, Pesach first tonight, and Zebach tomorrow. If, however, and this is what others say, the prayer is not that we have the Pesach offering tonight at the Seder, but that God willing, by next year we'll have it. Mashiach will come right away, but we'll have it by next year. Now, next year, the order is not going to be, even if tonight is Saturday night, the next year the order is not going to be such that it's Saturday night also, where you're doing Pesach and Zebach the next day. So therefore, keep the order the same, even if it's Saturday night. What happens if I know that the calendar says next year is going to be Saturday night? So I'm asking Hashem, next year, what am I eating? If next year is Saturday night, I'm going to be eating next year Pesach offering first. Maybe I should switch the order for that, because next year is going to be following. It explains. Even if based on the calculations as we have it today, Pesach above Mata Shabbos, next year Pesach is going to be Saturday night. Nonetheless, by the time next year comes around and the temple is here, we're going to be sanctifying the new month, not based on our calendar, which says next year it's going to be Saturday night Pesach. We're going to be sanctifying the new month based on the citation of the moon. And the citation of the moon can switch the day when Pesach is. And if for Efshi Shalei Matzah Shabbos, it's possible that next year it's not going to be Matzah Shabbos. Even according to the calendar I have, it says it's going to be Matzah Shabbos.
We have to also realize that in Chutz La'aretz we have two phases, not one.
Okay, so we treat day 2 in Chutz La'aretz the same way we would day 1.
Exactly.
Yeah, and therefore, irrespective, the text would remain the same.
Exactly.
Because we treat day 2 as if we would treat day 1. What were we going to say, Shua?
How is it possible that, well, it's because observing the moon is not accurate?
Not because it's not accurate, but because it could always be one of 2 days. The moon's rotation is not 29 and a half days, which means some months will have 29 days and some months will have 30 days. So we split it evenly and set it up in such a way that it works out. But not always is our Chodesh exactly at the same time when the moon actually appears, because we do it by averages so that the time matches up.
Yeah.
But when you're doing it by the actual accurate time when the moon is sighted, it could be 1 day off.
Yeah.
So by next year, Pesach could be Friday night, Saturday night, or even Sunday night, based on different, whether Nisan or Adar was full month and so on.
Right.
It's actually more accurate.
Yeah, it's more accurate. I was just
More
thinking.
accurate than the Gregorian calendar. Much more accurate.
Explain.
Sorry?
Explain.
Because of the fact that when we're looking at the cycle of the moon, with regard to when calculating, that in fact, if there is astronomers that have looked at this, and they're saying that basically when we calculate the way we do, we're much more accurate with regard to a time sequence in the seasons.
Interesting.
For example, with the Muslims, you have Ramadan at any time.
Right, because they don't. We have a hybrid of the moon and the sun,
Exactly.
and the Muslims only have moon, and the Gregorian is only sun.
Exactly.
Whereas we have a hybrid of both.
But because we correlate both,
Yeah,
that's why it's more
very
accurate.
interesting. Okay, let's conclude this chapter. There's a few more quick halachas that shouldn't be too difficult to go through. Nun, halacha 50. The custom is to pour out a little bit of wine, literally to throw. It says lizard to throw, to sprinkle. But we pour out a little bit of wine when we come to the words blood, fire, and pillars of smoke. Likewise, when we list all the 10 commandments by name, by each one, we pour out a little wine from our cup.
Commandments or
Plagues. I'm sorry. Thank you for listening. When we mention the 10 plagues in their general, not in their specific names, the Hainu meaning when we give the acronym Tetzach Hadash Barchav, right? We do that. We give an acronym to the 10 plagues and to these 3 words. Sachakol Yud, and we sprinkle blood then too. We sprinkle wine then too. Sachakol Yud Vav Pamim. This totals 16 times. Keneged Charbei Shel Kadosh Baruch Hu Shinekras Yehoich Umalach Al Mun Al Hanakama. And this is equivalent to the sword that is called Yehoich, similar to, which has a Yud Vav in there, which is the angel responsible for revenge. Put 3 more quick halachas. Non Aleph. The custom is to sprinkle that wine using the pointer finger, which is next to the thumb. Which this is referred to as finger without identifying which one. In halacha and Torah literature, if you want to say other fingers, you would say the finger that is, like the ring finger, the middle finger, the small finger, the thumb finger. But if you just say finger, unqualified, it refers to the index finger. And therefore use that finger, which is just called etzba finger. And this alludes to the fact that when the plagues happened, the Egyptians said, this is a finger of God. And we're talking about the plagues, we use our finger. Because this is the finger that God used. I'm sorry, others have the custom. There are those who use the finger that is called kemitza, which is the ring finger. Because it is this finger, the ring finger, that God used to strike the Egyptians. According to Medrash. What the meaning of that is, I don't know. Yesh, and there are those who have the custom, and this is indeed the Chabad custom, for esoteric reasons known for them, to spill wine out of the cup, not using the finger, but to pour directly out. And this is indeed the Chabad custom. So some use finger, because that's the plain finger without any prefix or suffix describing it, just called etzba, and the verse refers to it as etzba lakim, the finger of God. Others use the ring finger because the Medrash describes that's the finger that Hashem used to destroy the Egyptians, and others, including Chabad, based on Kabbalistic reasons, don't use the finger at all. We pour wine directly out of the cup. 2 more halachas, nun beis, from our Gemara. Soma chayiv b'kriyas Agada. The blind are obligated in the recitation of the Agada. As we learned, Rav Yosef and Rav Sheshes were both blind, recited the Haggadah on behalf of all those present. So either they're obligated to read the Haggadah, they can't read, they can't see, but to recite it, or at least to listen to those reciting the Haggadah, min ha-Torah, this is a biblical obligation. Therefore, because the blind are biblically obligated in the Haggadah, therefore they are equal in their obligation to everybody else present, and therefore they can be the one to lead the Seder and allow others to listen to them, and others can fulfill their obligation by listening. And this is what we derive from our Gemara, from the story of Sheshes and Rav Yosef. And we explained, right, that ordinarily, or as a rule, if 2 people are obligated in the same mitzvah, but one person is obligated on a higher level than the other, one is obligated rabbinically and one is obligated biblically, then the one who's obligated rabbinically may not be the one to recite that obligation and have the other person in mind, the other person listen. Because the one doing the recitation must be on equal footing, at least, or higher, of the one they are helping to fulfill the mitzvah. And therefore, by the fact that Rabbi Yosef and Rav Sheshes, who were both blind, read the Haggadah for their community, teaches us that they were blind and biblically obligated as everybody else present, and therefore they were able to recite the Haggadah, obviously by heart, because they couldn't read, whilst everybody else listened and fulfilled their obligation through them.
What if no one were also able to recite, and they were the only ones available?
Well, for sure they can. We just finished saying they're allowed to. Even if someone else was available.
Right.
They're allowed to. Talk adds, afilu, afim, who saw him AC Voldo.
I guess I was saying, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Perhaps they were a rabbinic, they had a rabbinic, but since no one else could read or recite,
it would be hard to imagine that because I'll tell you why.
I don't want to get thrown out.
I'll tell you that's a good point because first of all, the Gemara doesn't mention that, but I can tell you why the Gemara doesn't mention that. The Gemara doesn't make that argument. The Gemara doesn't say, well, maybe because, and I'll tell you why the Gemara comes to that conclusion, perhaps.
Oh, great.
Because the Gemara describes it as Rabbi Yosef and Rav Sheshes leading the Haggadah in their study house.
There you go.
Now you'd imagine their students can read Hebrew. Okay,
sure.
So there's your answer. Al-Teba concludes this halacha by saying, even if the person here is blind from birth, he still may lead the Haggadah. Nun Gimel, final halacha. Ma'aseh b'echad. This is a story of a person. Who's being held prisoner by Gentiles, non-Jews. And he did not know the Haggadah by heart. You only read it once a year. But Chumash. He had with him a Chumash. He had with him a Bible. So instead of reading the Haggadah, he opened up a Chumash and read all the relevant sections describing the Exodus. This is how this section of halacha concludes, chapter 4, 73, not the Shulchan Aruch. And this concludes really the order of the Haggadah up until Marar, Matzah, and so on. Right? What do we have left? We have still, tomorrow, God willing, we're going to look at the Rebbe's Haggadah on this section. Some interesting commentary from the Rebbe's Haggadah at the end of Magid, where we get to B'chol Devadur, and the brachas we make then, and the Hallel, some commentary from the Rebbe. And then we'll get back to the Gemara, which is going to have some discussion about the recitation of Hallel. And then the Gemara is going to have discussion about eating a matzah and those obligations, and the Afikoimon. This is all coming up in the Gemara. But we're coming towards getting closer. We're past the halfway mark for sure. Okay, Yidden. Have a wonderful day. Easy and meaningful fast. May these days be speedily transformed. Today is a blessing for everyone and all for Yidden. Only good and happy things from here on out.
Amen.
No more
A
wars.
wonderful day. No more wars. That's the end of it.
Amen.
By the way,
We will yotze all the wars necessary ever.
Beautiful story that actually happened to my grandfather at his table a couple of days after the war.
Yeah.
He decided to make a Seder. Very sad statement for in Poland. My grandfather was a well-known human rights lawyer. My grandmother was incredible, very she could do. She made some potatoes, various things that she could make. That time it was absolutely nothing. A couple of days. It's absolutely incredible. And there was one man only. They burnt all the all the Sidurim, of course, and all the Haggadahs and everything in Germany. And there was one man who had hidden the Haggadah and was supposed to bring it. He was arrested by Soviet soldiers in Yaslav on the way to the Soviet. They took him to prison because they said it must be some type of book that is a code for spying or whatever it may be. Finally, in the morning, a Jew saw the book and said, "Look, what are you talking about? This is just it's a Haggadah." But they didn't have the Haggadah table, so what did they do? Each one of them was able to recite the Haggadah from what he was.
So they went on a table asking, whatever you remember, say it. And whatever anybody remembered, they said, wow, that's incredible.
They all said it.
That's a beautiful story.
He went through the entire Haggadah.
That's a beautiful story.
Tapestry.
Exactly. It was it's
Oh my gosh,
actually,
that's a
I
very
wrote it
moving
back-
story. That's a very moving story.
And in
Where
that-
were they?
Jaslo. Jaslo is a city in Poland. There's a, by the way, a very interesting thing to tell you right away. And then they finished the Haggadah, and my grandfather said, now, as we have walked out for a personal Egypt.
Time for him to do his job.
Exactly. Let's add. That's exactly what they did.
Oh.
My grandfather created the idea of one more child.
Oh wow.
Absolutely amazing what he did. And so, but